Hi everybody. This video is going to focus on analyzing your data, and it's going to be broken up into two parts. The first part will focus more on the quantitative data or the numbers, and the second part will focus more on the qualitative data. So by now, hopefully you're just pedaling along, collecting your data. The time that we have slated in the course for collecting data is from October 9th to November 19th, which is about 6 weeks. Now, it may not take you the whole 6 weeks, and that's fine. It may take you a little bit longer than 6 weeks. That's fine too. But I would strongly encourage you to have all your data collected before Thanksgiving break, because after Thanksgiving break is when or maybe during the break, is when you'll want to be working on part 2 and analyzing your data. So you want to be sure that you have all that data collected in time to be able to do that. The 2 videos about data analysis will give you some tips to help you get started working on that. So I do want to say that analyzing data is both an art and a science. And there's different techniques you can use for analyzing quantitative data and qualitative, and that's why I've broken this up into 2 videos. But the key is to make sure that your data is always leading back to that question that you asked at the beginning. Sometimes you might collect data that isn't pertinent to that question. Maybe you're giving an end of the unit test, and that's one of your data points. But all the items on the test don't really align with what your question is. That's fine. In your part 2, you don't have to report all of the data you collected. You want to report the data that helps to answer your question. So you want to be sure that as you're collecting data, you're starting to analyze along the way. You don't have to wait till you have all the data in before you start looking at it, because sometimes the data might help you decide to do something a little bit different when you're collecting data. For example, let's say you're going to interview students. So you might find after the first or second interview that there's a question that you should really be asking that you hadn't started asking yet. Or you may find that some question needs to be reworded and that you can do that with the rest of your data. So it's okay to adapt that data a little bit midstream if you find that it needs to be done, if you find that you're missing something and you want to add a piece. This is not a highly scientific study. It's a study to help you understand what's happening in your classroom. So it is fine to make some small adjustments in there during the middle of the data collection if you feel like you need to help get a better picture of what's happening. So we think about data analysis as ongoing. That's the term interim analysis, to develop a successively deeper understanding of the research topic and to guide each round of data collection. So that's really what we're focusing on, is looking at that data along the way. Now, I do want to tell you, some of you may be disappointed, because in this video, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how to analyze your data, because you're all using different data tools. So I'm going to give you some general ideas for analyzing data. But if you feel like you need more, please do let me know. I'm glad to set up a personal video conference with you when you have your writing circle meeting. The next one, that will be a time to talk about data, and your writing circle team can help you a lot also with analyzing data. But there's not going to be an exact way to do this. And really, that's the great thing about being a researcher, is you're the one who developed the question. You're the one who gets to decide what angle to take as you analyze the data. So I just want to be sure and emphasize there is no right or wrong way to analyze this data. It's really you looking for the patterns, the trends, and what you pick out may be a little bit different than what I would pick out in the data. And so that is okay. Be comfortable with that. Know that there is no right or wrong way to do this. Also, please know that it is not expected that you necessarily are going to share all of the data you collected. It's the data that's going to help you to answer the question again. So you may have some data that you may not be sharing, and that's okay too. So really, if I can simplify this down into three main things you're going to do, and the first is reducing the data, interpreting the data, and drawing conclusions. So when I say reducing the data, I mean reporting it, comparing it, displaying it. So you're getting all that data in one place together. You're going to somehow kind of condense it into a table or a chart or a graph or some way to show that quantitative data. Now I'll talk in my next video about how to show that qualitative data. But when we're talking about numbers, reduce means to get it all in one place so it's easy to understand what the data is. It's labeled, it's in a graph or a chart or some way to figure out how to make sense of that data. And then you're going to interpret that data. So you're going to try to figure out, okay, what is this data telling us? What do I see if I put it on a graph? What is it showing us? And then you're going to draw conclusions like, why might that be happening in the data? So those are the main three things, but let's talk a little more. Let's dig a little deeper on those to help make those more clear to you. So when we're talking about quantitative data, that would be like tests or rubric scores or a Likert scale or tally marks, some way that you're recording numbers. Several of you are using the writing attitude survey with Garfield. That's a quantitative data piece because you're getting a set of numbers. Now, what do you do with those numbers? Well, you want to find a way to report them. So a way to share them with other people. So are you going to organize them by student's name or by the time period that you gave the assessment or by the number of or the certain items on the assessment? You're the one that makes those decisions. Again, no right or wrong here. What makes sense to you to report that data? And then you're going to make some comparisons. For instance, you might say, here are the pre-test scores, here are the post-test scores, and you list your students. That's a comparison, comparing the two together. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. You're not comparing a writing pre-test rubric score to a writing attitude survey. No, within your one data source, you're comparing those scores. And then figure out how are you going to display those in your part two. What's a way to display them that makes sense to you? Does this lend itself to a bar graph, to a pie chart, to just a table that reports the numbers? Again, no right or wrong answer, right? So what makes sense to you to show the data that you have? Those are the fun, that's the fun, I think the funnest part about doing research is getting to make those decisions and really getting to think deeply about what are these numbers really telling me as a teacher? So I wanted to give a couple of examples. This comes from my e-textbook article that I shared with you, and it's an example of a quantitative data analysis. So I have the students' preferences, pre and post. It's a very simple table. Notice I'm following the APA format for laying out a table. So when you're going to create your table, be sure that you're looking to see what is the correct format for laying out the table. There are APA rules for everything, as you know, and this is no different. So you can go to the OWL website that's listed way back in the beginning module in our course to get examples about how to lay out a table. Notice how the table is labeled. That's also an APA style. So it's labeled Table 1 or whichever number it is. And then you have a title for that table. And notice the words are capitalized for the title of that table. Notice how the table is laid out. 2 columns, straight across. That's all part of the APA format. And I'm trying to keep my table simple. trying to just report the data that helps to answer my question, which was, what are the e-textbook preferences for pre-service teachers in a language arts methods class? And so that's only what I report in my table. I also laid out data in a pie chart. Notice here, this is my figure. There was another pie chart, that was figure 1. This is figure 2. So there's a difference between a table, which is laid out in columns and rows, and a figure, which could be a pie chart, it could be a bar graph, it could be a photograph, could be a sample of student work. Those would be good examples of figures. So be sure that you're giving yours the right name. And then you see again the APA style for labeling the figure. You see the title, capital letters. There is no real APA style for creating a pie chart because, you know, it's a pie chart and there's only really a certain way to make it. But it's the labels that we follow for the APA style. So again, I'm keeping my pie chart simple. I'm reporting only the data that helps to answer the question. How does e-textbook influence the reading habits and preferences of undergrad or pre-service teachers in a language arts methods course? So I'm only reporting what I need to report. Okay, let's keep going. So if I could break this into steps, here are the steps that I would give for you to use. First, gather your data sources. And I would break those up into your 3 sources of data. So you have all your data, say from a rubric in one spot. Then you have all your data from a pre and post test in one spot. And you have all your data from an observation of children in guided reading groups. So you're going to analyze each of those separately and make your own data table or figure for each of those data sources. But first, get everything together in one place. Then decide how you want to display that data. What kind of graphical display do you want that data to be seen in so that it makes the most sense to you and to the person or people who are going to read your work. Once you get it laid out and you get it into the table, then really take the time to thoughtfully look over that table. Examine the table or the figure. Say, okay, what is this telling me now when I see this data all laid out? What is it telling me about my students and how well they're learning, how well they're responding to the question that I'm asking? So that's examining the data. Think about how you're going to explain what's happening. Try your explanation out on someone else. Bring it to your writing circle group and try it out on them. Try it out on a friend or someone you live with or a colleague and say, does this make sense to you? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? That's number 4, actually sharing this with somebody else. It's when you talk through that process that you can really start to formulate your thoughts. And then once you get those thoughts, write them down. Make notes in your journal or get them into an outline for your part 2. But be sure that you're writing about it really close to the time that you're analyzing the data because it's easy to forget. Don't make your graph and look it over and then think, okay, after Thanksgiving, I'll write this out. Because then you have different conclusions possibly, or you may not have those same great thoughts as you did when you first looked over that data. So be sure and make your notes to do this. So hopefully this has given you an idea for a process to make that analysis. Again, if you're not sure, please be sure and let me know through email, phone call, video chat. I can help kind of guide you through this process more on an individual basis. Just know that your goal here is to have, if you have 3 sources of quantitative data, you're going to have 3 different things that you create or displays of that data, and you're going to analyze those, each one separately, and then you're going to try to pull that together at the end of your part 2. Hopefully that's enough to get you started.